if you were here last year, there was a fantastic talk on juniors everywhere, and this new junior influx, which as software developers, a lot of us weren't really used to. It's still a very in-demand and rare skill set, but getting into this industry was so incredibly hard. That talk gave a lot of practical tips on what a senior should do day to day to better support their juniors, and that will be part of the purpose of this panel. But I noticed an interesting thing in a lot of the feedback and critiques of that talk were, yeah, we never got to the bigger picture. Like, I know it's good to support the juniors, but how do we really actually go about solving this problem? There's no real official way or normal way to get into the software industry, and that can be a real asset. In theory, at least, it sounds great that there are a bunch of different ways to get into this industry. It should really promote diversity. The elephant in the room is that we don't really have great diversity. It's still a problem. And that begs the question, well, what's going on? We have a flexible format of getting into the industry. And as someone who's relatively new, I'm about 2 years in, I think we're mistaking ambiguity for flexibility. And so part of what this panel is your day-to-day, how to treat your junior developers better, how to see growth at all levels in your organization, but also a larger question of, is there something we can do as an industry to solve this problem? Not necessarily getting as many people in as fast as we can, but getting people in who are going to raise the bar in the industry, increasing a lot of diversity and giving us, as the developers, more power. One of the mistakes the tech industry likes to make is thinking we're more special than we are. Don't worry, we're very special. But there has been all sorts of situations where a technology that was once considered cutting edge or not general to the public is now something you can't live without. That's clearly the internet these days, but we've had that happen with plumbing, electricity, cars, all industries that I'm sure at the time were very scary and difficult to get into, and now are very standard, fantastic opportunities for employment. So without further ado, I'm going to let this panel introduce themselves and talk a little bit about why they're here.
Hi, my name is Brian Schiller. I work for Devetry, same as Vince actually. But I also run a program called Code Forward, which is sponsored by Devetry, and we take anyone who was interested in learning to code. It's like a free boot camp, but one of the ways that you can make it free is by having it be after, like, it's not my full-time job. I'm not sure you can run a free boot camp with like a 30-person class size and have it be someone's full-time job who's experienced and knows what they're doing. So we have kind of a hybrid approach where students have to learn on their own, and then we come together in class to talk about what are the hard parts. Let's do some work together so we can learn from one another. Sorry for taking up a little extra time. That's kind of where I'm coming from with respect to the apprenticeship, as I really want to see all of my students succeed. I want to see them land at jobs they're happy with in the industry.
I'm Brooks Patton, and I am currently a software developer at Apto, but I did spend 3 years as a lead instructor at Galvanize, which is a local code school here in Denver. And I got my start in the tech industry as something like very similar to an apprenticeship, possibly. I was an intern for a year at NASA, where I became a systems administrator, and that did transition into a full-time job and led me down the road here. So I have a lot of opinions on how we can possibly solve this crisis and get moving forward as well.
I'm Allan Wintersieck. I'm CTO and co-founder of Devetry, as these two. I'm coming with the kind of mindset of more the business owner, hiring manager. We have a lot of junior developers that we end up hiring from a lot of different boot camps, and we end up with a lot of decisions around who do we hire, when, how much do we teach them, how much do we assume we're going to have to take a loss up front to teach them, what is an okay amount, that kind of angle. So I think this is a really fascinating topic from that angle too, because it has to be a good situation for people that want to get into the industry and learn, but also a good situation for businesses. Otherwise, it's not going to work for anybody.
My name is Morgan fucking Whaley, and Ashley Carter dared me to do that. I'm here because Vince asked me to be here, but I also decided that I wanted to be here to support this panel. I am currently a senior prototype architect at Charter Communications, and I have been a junior before But I came in not from coding boot camps, not from a college program, but from a largely self-taught, while working full-time, different kind of point of entry into tech from a career pivot. And part of what is near and dear to my heart is both increasing diversity, not just from a gender perspective, but from a overall background perspective, and fighting the excessive homogenization of the experience of people entering into the tech industry.
Cool. Well, a huge thank you to all of our panelists for being here. I'm going to go over really quick, just in case anyone's unaware of the junior influx. A few light numbers. This is the growth of the coding bootcamp industry. It's grown by about 9 times over the last couple of years. If that's scary, it really shouldn't be, because the job market is for software developers, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is going to outpace that growth easily. A quick note about this number, where we're gaining about 300,000 new positions by 2026. This does not include DevOps, and by a lot of the BLS's statistics, probably would miss data engineering and a lot of other positions we're going to need in the tech industry. So we have an influx that won't ruin our salaries, yay, but it's still a question of how do we deal with this influx. Before I really get to some of the thoughts we had about dealing with it, I wanted to ask the panel, what are your thoughts on how this industry can do a better job of welcoming newcomers, top to bottom, just overall?
I think one of the things that's really important, a lot of people have internships. I had an internship when I first started out, and I've also mentored interns. And I think at the point of doing an internship, it's so important to have someone who is directly responsible for your learning. So as an intern, there needs to be one person you can point at and say, this person is responsible for making sure I have what I need to get my work done, and also make sure that I'm progressing in the right direction. If that responsibility falls on like a team, it's kind of an amorphous, well, maybe Rob has it, or maybe Marcia has it, or someone else might be picking up the slack, but in reality, no one is. It needs to be someone's direct responsibility, or it might not happen.
And I agree with everything there. And I also want to add that official training for seniors and how to mentor is something that's going to be really important to happen. And I don't think that happens right now. I think we just hand juniors or pre-juniors developers to a senior developer and say, go train them. And they have no, like they just talk at them and show them and code for them and just hope that they figure things out just by looking at somebody else doing it. That's not going to work. I think official training for how to teach is going to be necessary.
I agree with all that as well. I think also on the business side of things, I think it's important for businesses to understand that if you were to look at a single intern, for example, and think, okay, is this going to be a profit or a loss to the business? Well, that one single intern is probably going to look like a loss to the business because you're going to pay them, I hope, and you're not going to get probably enough out of them, quote unquote, to make that worthwhile. I think you have to look at it on the other side and say, the community growing as a whole is going to benefit my business because I need mid-level people and senior level people, and I need the overall community to be strong. So therefore, as a business owner, you have a duty to provide this kind of mentorship and training, even if it looks like on your P&L, it looks like it may not be perfect or something. You have a duty to make that happen, even if it's not a monetary thing.
So in addition to what's been talked about already, I think businesses need to figure out what the fuck they want. I have seen teams large and small who will hire a entry-level engineer as a cost-saving measure, or because they don't believe that the lift is as heavy as it actually is to get an application off the ground, for example, or that just throwing a warm body at a problem is going to magically fix it. In addition, I've worked for organizations that hire nothing but senior level people because they believed that their problems were too juicy and too big to possibly like risk their integrity of bringing in someone who may need to learn as they go. And companies don't understand that when you take a person who is fairly new and you invest the time and you grow that individual, you are investing in their loyalty to your organization. My last job was at a company called Cognizant, who acquired Quick Left in Boulder. And we hired about a 1-to-1 ratio of fairly entry level, say less than 2 years experience, to people with 4+ years experience. The people who we brought on who had less experience generally stayed for 3 or more years, which is a tremendous amount of time compared to how long most people stay, especially in their first jobs in tech. The salary helped a little bit, I think, but we really gave people a springboard. We had a guy who came in from Turing Academy who published a book 2 years later on React and Redux. And I believe that part of that was the fact that the company and the team and the leadership was structured in a way that that guy was not thrown off the deep end, but was also able to add business value because he wasn't doing nothing but making text changes or making trivial bug fixes. He was allowed to step in and give architectural opinions on a project. He was allowed to learn. He wasn't just stuck in a corner doing the BS 1 and 2 point tickets every single sprint. And that investment and understanding of how all different levels of engineers fit within the larger business considerations and the goals of the team was a sea change from other places I saw that couldn't hang on to folks and couldn't understand why, or simply didn't have the right kind of team cohesion and the right division of tasks and business considerations to accomplish their goals.
You already spoke to it a little bit there, Morgan, but the loyalty question seems to scare a lot of businesses away from doing something like this. Is there anything else you want to add that Cognizant did that really got those people in there for 3 years, which is an eternity in the tech scene?
Yeah, I mean, they did it. And then to tie it back to apprenticeships as well, I worked for a company in Boulder called Market. And they did have a 4-week paid kind of training program that worked like an internship. They brought in folks, paid them $20 an hour, and they spent 4 full weeks in the classroom. It had to be people with some level of technical acumen, and this was really before G School and Turing Academy and all of these things became a big deal. But it was a way for people to build up their skill sets and start to add value. And so what both Cognizant and Market seemed to be very successful in was giving the right support network to individuals and then giving them increasingly interesting challenges as their skill sets grew. So it wasn't like, oh, well, you've only been here for 2 years, so we're not going to give you this interesting project. We're going to give it to this other guy who's been here for 7 years. It was a lot more diplomatic than that. And I think that made a huge, huge difference. And then just having leadership who truly cares, leadership who's going to do one-on-ones with direct reports and talk to them about how they can grow, and be willing to listen when people have differing opinions and not just defer to the team lead or the senior architect or anyone like that, that not just the loudest voice in the room or even the voice that's been speaking the longest gets to have the most say-so. So I think those things were super successful.
That's awesome. So to introduce a little bit, unless you had something to add there, Allan? Okay. To introduce you to the model that I'm interested in studying and interested in implementing for electricians, plumbers, welders, people working with something that we don't even think of as the hot technology, but at one time was, you have a short formal education, maybe a year, could be as low as a couple of months. Then you go out and you work pretty much directly behind your master, I guess you would call it. It's a little bit of a weird term. And you learn from them, and they explain basically everything they're doing, top to bottom, slows them down a little bit, but in exchange, you obviously work for a lower wage at first, you learn from them, you're brought along. The key point I want to make about this model is there's a perception in the United States that it's just for a small group of industries, but this is actually used in accounting, software development, a lot of different network security paths in Germany especially. So roughly, I think it's still a little over half of the population will do an apprenticeship, maybe even more than that. And then the Swiss, the Dutch, a lot of different cultures are still using this model. That's partially because of how awesome it works, but it's also partially because they've been doing it since the dark ages. As panelists, what do you think we can take away from this model, and in what ways do we need to blaze our own path and do things differently?
Sure. So one of the things that I struggle with thinking about how to make apprenticeships work for software is that it seems like most of the work happens in your head. Whereas I don't know a lot about those more traditional trades that have apprenticeships, but it seems like maybe there's more of a role for someone who is just a pair of hands that like is there and sees what's going on, and they can hold things and kind of like menial tasks while they're learning. We've like automated out all of the menial tasks in software. You might disagree if you've been doing a lot of deploys lately or something like that, but we've largely automated out the menial tasks of software engineering. And so it seems like those menial tasks would be what an apprentice would do. Like, as Allan was saying, like an apprenticeship needs to add value not just for the apprentice, but also for the company. And like, what does an apprentice do in software engineering, I think is a question that we should talk about.
I think that this is something that comes up a lot, is what do we do with our interns and our junior developers? What tasks can we give to them? And my recommendation is stop calling them interns and junior developers. They are developers, they are team members, and they can handle every single problem that you hand to them, but maybe you should pair them with a senior developer for that time. But don't like only give them silly little things. They'll never grow with that. Give them the hard things and then give them somebody to work with them to get them to that level faster.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think adding on to what Brian was saying, I think I'm not an electrician, so I don't know, but I think probably how it works in an apprenticeship like that is there's a hard certificate at the end of it, and you kind of have to have it to become an electrician. So therefore, there's a defined pathway. It's not like you can say, oh, I'm just going to do half of this, and then I feel like I can probably do this on my own, and then just quit and go do that. You can't because of certificates. And I feel like that's an angle on the kind of more businessy side, which is tough to conquer in software, which is we have a culture, for better or worse, often for better, where you kind of jump ship to other companies somewhat rapidly if you feel like you can be paid more or have a better situation, which fair enough, you can't blame people for that. But at the same time, then it creates a culture of how do you voluntarily take on something where you're going to operate at a loss for a while when you have no guarantee of having any sort of return on that investment down the road. I think some of that can be mitigated just by being honest with each other. If you talk to the person that you're hiring, most people are good people, I think, in general. And if you say, hey, I'm going to bring you on and I'm going to teach you for a while, and it would be really great if we can kind of make sure that this is a 3 or 4 year engagement, but obviously I can't hold you to that. And I think most people will generally go along with that as long as you're not, a terrible company or a terrible manager in general. But I feel like that is a hurdle also in apprenticeships for software.
So I've never worked in the trades, but I have a lot of friends who do, and I have a friend right now who is ex-Army and became a welder when she got out of the military. And so I talked to her about her path because I wanted to gain a greater understanding of what people go through. And what she told me was that she went through part-time classes about 6 hours a day for 3 months. And she worked part-time. I can't remember what she did during that time. Not related to welding, like something in her own career path, I think like admin assistant. And then after that, she did move into an apprenticeship role. And the companies that took on apprentices worked very closely with the welding school that she went to. And I think there are a lot of companies, if we apply this to our own situation, who work very closely with Galvanize, Turing Academy, other boot camps and education programs outside of the traditional education model where internships do generally tend to be the segue into full-time employment. So if we think about it from that perspective, she said what basically happened is she was taken on as an intern after 3 months and was given increasingly difficult tasks. So to Brian's point about, hey, hold these, hand me this, what have you. The problem I think we have in tech is that we don't have as much definition and we don't have these very defined repeatable processes. There are specific ways that you weld pipes. There are specific ways that you put together wiring. There are specific ways you do plumbing for a house, work with rebar, that kind of stuff. Our work is infinitely more nebulous. And when I've talked to my friend about this, she's like, wait, you don't just have one set way of doing things that's documented, you don't have blueprints. And I'm like, no, I'm kind of the person who has to figure this out and write the blueprints as an architect and then get into it, but each problem is unique. It's like every time you're designing an entirely new building and you have no clue who's going to live in it later, or have to like paint the walls even sometimes. So but what she kind of brought up was that through her apprenticeship program, she basically was adding business value through her tasks, and they were very clearly defined. And I think that's something that we don't have as much in technology, because we are either beholden to the 2-week agile sprint, or because we are decoupled from the business considerations of a request, or we just wonder why this designer has to use 3-pixel rounded corners on every goddamn thing all the time. And so I think a lot of it, in order to be successful, is also rethinking how we work together and how we collaborate as developers, and how that can help facilitate these types of roles a little bit better. Because if you take away a lot of the murkiness, then you're probably building a path for people to succeed a lot better. And that's what I've seen from folks who are entering the trades, where that definition allows them to come into work and immediately understand what it is that they're doing, who they're working with, to the points here about bringing on senior devs and really having somebody work very much one-on-one with them. And then that person knows exactly what they need from their apprentice pretty much every step of the way. And I think that structure really helps facilitate the continued growth and understanding. And it's done in this less intense way than saying, okay, you're going to go through 7 months of super intense boot camp and put in 70-hour weeks, and then you're going to come out fried, and then you're going to have to apply to jobs, and then you're going to have to go through tech interviews, and then you're going to have to whiteboard, and then you're going to have to whiteboard again, and then we're going to bring you on, and then maybe we're going to give you someone to work with. It's a very different track, and I think we need to take some more pages from the other side of this process.
On that, I think there was a lot there in those answers, so thank you. There is sort of a high-level macro industry question, and then a really practical one I want to get to. The high-level one is that in my research, the trades have associations. They get together with a group like Denver Devs, except not quite as punk rock, but that's okay. And they go to the universities. And so rather than a single company, an entire group of 5 to 10 organization talks with the university, and then they trust each other to, well, where if I train an apprentice and they go work at your company, next year it's going to be the other way around, because we all have this powerful, valuable thing to offer. Is there something standing in the way other than just the impetus of doing that in the technology industry? Do we move too fast? Or what would it look like for that to happen in tech, do you think? Easy question. So.
I mean, honestly, it sounds kind of like we need a union. Like, you need a union and a certification of like, oh, you're going to want union certified people, or like union accredited people doing this job, or it might not be done right. And I think, I don't know, that's one of it's a collective organization problem of like, it might be better for all of the businesses if everyone did have this, okay, well, we might train them and you might hire them after that, but you'll train someone and we'll hire them after that. But if one business doesn't partake, then everybody knows the tragedy of the commons. Yeah. So I don't have to teach that. My wife is a resident at Denver Health, and the residency program has an interesting approach to this. They are like a big group. Like all the residency programs in the country agree that, and somebody who knows better than me might correct me on this, but if you accept a residency position and then leave, no other residency program will take you. I think you then have to like wait until the next time everyone's getting hired, like the next match, the next time it happens in March. But that's like a pretty strong, pretty big stick, a pretty big deterrent. And I'm not saying that's a great thing. Like
perhaps there's a way we could phase something like that in, not a blacklist, but hey, they're no longer certified by us or vouched for by this group, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets to what Allan was talking about maybe if there's a certificate at the end that's widely accepted as like, oh, this person knows these things, or like we trust them to do these skills, then it's okay if people leave jobs after their training, because it's it's a little bit more, I don't know, fungible.
Well, and
Their
you've
skills
offered-
are more transferable.
You've offered that something of value that'll make them more likely to stay as well in that case. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think just adding on to that, I think that adds in a level of, if there's a defined time period to get something like that, then you bake in the fact that you have return on investment in that time period. So it's not like, oh, I'm absorbing the 6-month training period only, but not the portion where I get valuable work from you, which I think is the thing that makes employers scared about this kind of thing right now in tech, is that there's nothing stopping people from just leaving after you train them, theoretically speaking. There's like, honesty and things like that, but nothing hard that stops you.
So my husband's a chef, and he runs a business. He does sushi, and he works a ton, and I'm constantly on his ass about it. And I say, why don't you hire a helper? And he said, because I will essentially be paying that guy to learn. And I'm like, yes, and? What? What's wrong with that? And I've seen this at tech companies where there is a perception that if you are bringing in someone, that they damn well better stay at least a year. And it's this very weird one-way street of loyalty, I think, in a lot of places, not everywhere, because I've talked about places I've worked that have really grown folks of all levels. And but the other side of that, I think, is that there is this idea that you're essentially, it's not even training the competition, because most of the companies here don't compete directly for customers. It's not like defecting to a different real estate firm or car sales or, in my husband's perception, restaurants. Instead, it is collectively hoisting up the entire tech industry overall. And this is when like a terrific swell of music would happen, except we didn't plan for that. It's like, so yeah, I think there needs to be kind of like this shift, and this can happen both with leadership as well as the individual contributor level, of people being more supportive of folks learning, cross-training. And to the subject of certificates, I think we are on our way with things like AWS certifications and stuff like that, that can help at least add some level of defined legitimacy behind what somebody has learned. And so I think it's also just, it's supporting people who want to learn more and then diving in deeper. Like Google has 80-10 program. My company, I'm sorry, 80-20. Can't do math. That's why I work on the front end. At my company, we have 90-10, and I'm training a bunch of designers on code concepts. And there is a wild support from leadership on that. They're not afraid that the designers are going to decide that they like programming more and leave the team. They're like, if anyone can increase their core competencies, then everybody wins, and we just need to make sure that we harness that and keep people happy. And I think people forget that it's not just that easy, but it's not much harder than that either.
That's fantastic. One of my mentors early in the industry, we might not have a union, but he said gossiping is our version of a union, so make sure you guys gossip a lot about your bosses. I did want to add just a couple of practical ideas. Some companies are implementing them. There's a panelist who couldn't be here who was at one, sadly, where the rules of QA and support desk, which I know I've been on the support desk for, and that was seen as a turnover bomb and nobody wanted to touch. But some companies have been co-opting those to become the things you do as an apprentice, the go for tasks. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that, or we can also transition, if we're ready, to just practical stories, either good or bad, about mentorship, success as well as failure in the industry, and just so these people can take that away and bring it back to their employers. It'd be good if we could do audience questions too. Oh yeah, no, those are right after this.
I've seen this 2 times that companies have utilized like a QA department, or when I was at NASA, a control room. So a control room was basically our overnight staff that would take in support queue tickets, and you might almost think of it as like level 1 support. They did a little bit more too. What I've noticed when it was really being managed well was you give them the steps of how to get out. Like, hey, welcome to this job. Here are how you can no longer do the job if you really want to. And then you train them, you give them the mentorship, and you let them know how close they are. That way, the rest of the teams can then hire out of there when they want to. But like many things happen, eventually that stopped happening. The managers left, and new managers came in, and no longer were new people being brought into the control room, being told how to get out, and it sort of stagnated, and the level of support for the clients was actually going down. And so it's a win-win. When you have one of these departments that's being taught how to get out of the department, they provide better service, and they also get brought into the rest of the company at higher level juniors than otherwise.
Guys, before we go to audience questions, just a quick chance to talk about a really awesome or really sad story very quickly on apprenticeship and what you learned.
I had an intern who will go nameless, and she was awesome. She was really bright and really excited to learn things, and no one was directly responsible to be her mentor. And this is the first point I brought up because this really stuck in my head. And she's doing fine, by the way. She's working at Google now, I think. But she did some work for us, and we would sit down and talk about, okay, so here's this feature, and this is how it needs to work, and here's how you can, here's how I recommend going at this. And we'd kind of sat down, and then I would go away for a week because I was really busy doing a whole bunch of things for this company. And then I would see a pull request, and I might give it a cursory look, but I was too busy to give it a proper review. And then, or someone else might give it a looks good to me thumbs up. And it got merged in, and then a couple of days later, we're like, why is everything so slow on production? And the answer was that there was a big, nasty N+1 query issue that appeared in the, practically every request flow. And it was something that I'd specifically cautioned her against, but then I wasn't available when she had questions about the alternate route. And she was like, well, this is an obvious way to do it. And it didn't get caught in code review because we weren't doing code review very well. And yeah, so that was a lot more work to clean up than it would have been to just be available and teach in the first place. And so this isn't a story that makes me look particularly good, but I hope I've learned something from it. And I hope you can take it and do code reviews properly for yourselves. Does anyone else? Yeah.
This is more on the negative side too, unfortunately. We had an intern a while back who also will remain nameless, but it was a situation where he was just the nicest person and really a hard worker and really seemed like a great guy. And we just continually couldn't I'm sure everyone's worked with someone like that it doesn't seem like anything you do, you just can't quite make it click for them. And so it'd be constantly trying, and then you kind of let them do their own thing for a little bit, and it just was never kind of progressing and clicking. And so I still think about that and trying to figure out is there something more we possibly could have done to try to train that person and try to kind of make that happen. But it feels like there's a leap there of just sort of absorbing what you're teaching and trying to kind of make that click and make it work, and that's the leap that I don't have an answer on trying to solve. And it was it just sucks when situations like that happen.
I have a great dumpster fire story that also ties back to my first point of companies need to know what they want. So I was working for a startup near here that will remain nameless, 24-person company. They never actually had a web application team. And when I interviewed there, I was trying to escape a company where the writing was on the wall that everyone was about to get laid off. And I was trying to finish my house and sell it. And I was also paying rent in Denver, so I was absolutely terrified. So I took the job despite many, many red flags, because it turns out if you wear rose-colored glasses, that red flags just look like flags. So they had hired someone fresh out of a coding boot camp who had come from a completely non-technical background. So he was essentially, 6-7 months into his career. Super bright guy, but simply hadn't been in the shit enough. And they charged him with building a brand new application in a brand new framework, and managing the client by himself because they didn't have product owners or project managers or any layer between him and the client. So they gave him this very tall order, and they said, yeah, well, we're technically flat here, so you're not his manager, and you're really not a senior, but, we really need your help because we need 2 devs on this project. At this point, I think I'd been in my career like 5 years. Took the job, walked in to like 1,800 line controllers in Angular because all the logic was there, because that's what Stack Overflow says to do. So trying to both maintain velocity on this project while slowly unfucking it was almost impossible. And after 5 months, I got laid off because I couldn't get the project under control that I was told I was not in control of anyway. And the more junior engineer, was kept on because he was cheaper, and they said, well, we're just going to employ kind of like a last in, first out system. In the conversation where I was let go, it was also mentioned that the consultancy who had been brought on to review the code said, why the fuck did you hire this person? She doesn't know what she's doing. I was told this by the company president and then given almost no severance. It was super. So I told myself that it was a great summer because I had sold my house by that point and had a whole bunch of money in the bank and I could go have fun. But it was a blow to my perception of tech and startups that I still have never fully recovered from. And I still kind of feel bad for this other individual who was essentially just thrown off the deep end, was pretty visibly flailing, and is probably still flailing in that organization.
Did you have a story?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the place I work with right now, one of the things that we do is we do not allow our junior developers to opt out of code reviews. And I'm not talking about their code not being reviewed. I mean reviewing other people's code, specifically senior, mid-level, and other juniors. We make them do it all. And I think that this is a great way to sort of level up people because it forces them to see how things are going, how things can be done. A negative that I notice is that we do tend to sometimes review juniors' code a little bit more harsher than other seniors' code. I've noticed in our own code reviews that we will allow style problems to slide on a senior's code because, they're the senior, they've been here, quite a few years. We know they know what's going on. The junior makes the same exact mistake. Oh, well, you can't do that. That's not allowed. So consistency, I think, is really important when showing them how important it is, but also to get them to that level, make them understand how important this is to all of us.
Yeah. Please come up afterward, talk to us about getting more involved in this, and thanks for coming.